Hello again. Rabbi Travis here, inside today. Home. Hope it'll be a little more quiet. We just finished the holiday of Shavuot. It was nice. My synagogue held services on Friday morning and Shabbat morning outdoors. Um, it was interesting. It's a little warm. Uh, Someone's weed whacking and then a couple yards over, heard a leaf blower, a lot of car and truck noise from La Vista Road. Airplanes flying over. The birds were nice, but it was while not ideal, it was nice to be back together with the community. Second day of Shavuot, we customarily say Yizkor like we do in the last days of all the holidays. So I was glad that I had a chance to say Yizkor for my father, my father-in-law. Had a chance to continue saying Kaddish for my mother. And this prompted me to ponder a little bit. I want to talk a little bit today about the question of heaven and hell. Specifically, do Jews believe in heaven and hell? And before I look at a few sources, I think it's worth pointing out a couple of givens. We can only have a discussion of heaven and hell, first of all, if we believe, as Judaism does, that people have free will, they have a choice. If we were Calvinists who believe in predestination, to me at least, the notion of heaven and hell makes no sense. How can you punish somebody? How can you condemn somebody to eternity of damnation for being a murderer or being an adulterer or whatever it is, if it was their fate and destiny to be a murderer or an adulterer? So Judaism clearly believes in free will. Some people find this counterintuitive in a sense. How could God give us commandments and at the same time say you can follow them or not? Well, the Torah and Jewish law sets forth certain consequences. It's up to us if we choose to observe the commandments. The Torah sometimes describes the good things that will happen, though there's a very famous rabbinic tradition that the reward for doing a mitzvah is a mitzvah itself, that we should, it says famously in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, that we should serve God like servants who don't expect to get a reward. We shouldn't serve God in order to get a reward. But there are consequences clearly laid out for non-observance of the commandments, but we have the choice whether to do so or not. The second given is that we believe in a merciful God. God lays out consequences, but he is always ready to forgive us should we truly and sincerely repent from our misdeeds. We feel ashamed by our misdeeds. We long to return to the proper path. So I mention this because Judaism, unlike Christianity, has no notion of eternal damnation. We're going to talk in a minute or two what Judaism does believe in, but we don't believe in a God who would punish somebody forever for sin. Years ago, when I was in college, I had a roommate, good dear friend, who was Catholic, and we very much enjoyed listening to George Carlin. George Carlin had a stand-up bit that started, "I used to be a Catholic, you grow." And he sort of mocked the notion that he talked about the church for many, many years banned eating meat on Friday. And then he changed his mind, and he would joke about, could you imagine spending an eternity in hell for eating a beef jerky on a Friday before the church changed the rules? That's a silly and trivial example, and I think it makes light, which was Carlin's attempt, of a Catholic belief, but we don't believe in eternal damnation. And the third thing, which is a correlate to heaven and hell, and we'll talk about it, is the whole notion of an afterlife. And the discussion of an afterlife and a belief in an afterlife, I think, is driven by a very basic question that everybody always asks, and that is, why do bad things happen to good people? The rabbinic tradition holds that when Moses ascended Mount Sinai and he said to God, "May I see your glory?" and God responds, "No one may see my face and live." And the rabbis are asking, what's going on with this conversation? They say, really what Moses is asking is this question: why do bad things happen to good people? And God says, it's not for human beings to know. And the idea of an afterlife, which gives an ultimate balancing of the scales, brings comfort to people. When you see good people suffering, there's a certain degree of comfort saying, well, in the world to come, whatever that may mean, and there's not, no one's come back yet to tell us exactly what the world to come is, and there's lots of views about it. But whatever that may be, the suffering in this world is offset by the rewards and the pleasures of the next world. Conversely, evil people get rewards for whatever good deeds they might do in their life in this world, and they suffer in the next world. They get a less good portion. It's hard to describe exactly, again, what goes on. So let's take a look at some source material about this question of heaven and hell, and then we'll talk briefly about an afterlife. I want to start. There's a very famous story from the Gemara, which touches on this notion of suffering after death, and it is one of the source texts, so to speak, for why mourners say Kaddish. But it really, sorry, my wife is putting dishes away. It really touches on this notion of what comes after we pass. Story goes as follows. The famous Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was strolling through a cemetery when he saw a naked man, black as charcoal, carrying much wood and hurrying like a horse. "Stop," the rabbi ordered him, and the man stopped. "What is with you?" demanded Rabbi Akiva. "What is this harsh labor of yours? If you are a slave and your master is so harsh, then I will free you. And if you are poor, let me make you wealthy." The man answered, "Please, Rabbi, do not delay me. My supervisors may become very angered if I am late." Rabbi Akiva responded, "Who are you, and what do you do?" The man replied, "I'm dead. Every day they send me to chop wood, upon which they burn me every night." Rabbi Akiva asked, "And when you were in this world, what was your work?" "I was a tax collector," the man answered. "I would favor the wealthy and persecute the poor." As an aside, I'm going to interrupt the study. This is very consistent with basic Jewish belief. It's wrong to assume that rituals are the be-all and end-all for Judaism, that we primarily focus on keeping Shabbat or keeping kosher or whatever they are. Those commandments between people, caring for the poor, the visiting the sick, giving charity, doing righteousness, doing justice, they are really what God is after in this world. And as proof, one of the proofs brought us is think about the tablets that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai. On the first tablet, there were 5, we call them incorrectly translated as commandments. They were the first 5 of the 10 utterances, Aseret Dibrot. Those deal between man and God. The second tablet has those laws between man and man. Don't steal, don't murder, don't covet, right? And clearly God could have created a font or a tablet large enough to hold them all. And we see that the 2 tablets show that they are equally important. There are some who would argue that when a person fulfills a commandment between man and man, he or she, by extension, is fulfilling a commandment between man and God, and therefore those between man and man are actually more important. Be that as it may. So the man said, "I was a tax collector. I would favor the wealthy and persecute the poor." So asked the rabbi, "Have you heard anything from your supervisors about any way you could be redeemed from your punishment?" "Yes," the man replied. Excuse me. "I heard from them, but it is something that could never happen. They said that if I had a son And if that son would stand among the congregation and say the Kaddish, and the congregation would answer, Amen, Yahei Shmei Rabbi Mivarach, may his great and holy name be blessed, then they could acquit me from my punishment. But he continued, I did not leave a son behind. True, my wife was pregnant when I died, but I do not know whether she gave birth to a boy. And if she did, who would teach him Torah? I do not have a single friend in the world. On the spot, Rabbi Akiva resolved to search for that child. He asked the man for his name. My name is Ukba. My wife is Shoshiva. My town was Lanuka'a. Immediately, Rabbi Akiva set out for that town. When he arrived there, he asked the townspeople about this man Ukba. May his bones grind in hell, they replied. He asked about his wife, Shoshiva, and they said, may her name and her memory be erased. He asked about her child, and they said, she had a boy and he is uncircumcised. Shorthanded, meaning he has no Jewish background, no connection to Judaism whatsoever. The people hated her so much, they hadn't even bothered to circumcise the child. Without further delay, Rabbi Akiva took this child and circumcised him. He set the child before him to teach him, but the child would not learn. So he fasted for 40 days. After 40 days, a voice came from heaven. Rabbi Akiva, what are you fasting for? He replied, Master of the universe, have I not already made myself a guarantor before you for the lad? Immediately, God opened the boy's heart, and the rabbi was able to teach him how to read Torah and how to say Shema Yisrael and the silent prayer, the Shemona Esrei, and Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals. Then he stood him before the congregation, and he said, Baruch Hu, and they answered him. Then he said the Kaddish, and they answered him, Amen, Yahei Shmei Rabbi Mevorach. His father was freed and came straight to Rabbi Akiva in a dream. Let your heart rest, assured that you saved me from the judgment of Gehenna. So again, as I mentioned, this story is frequently quoted in discussions of why Jews say Kaddish and the history of say Kaddish. I did some research about this when I started my mother's mourning period this year. It's a fascinating topic. But the story ends with Gehenna. You saved me from Gehenna. So let's be clear. Gehenna is not the Christian version of hell. Not at all. We don't believe in devils with tails and horns and pitchforks and burning fires, just as we don't believe with angels with wings and harps floating on clouds. Gehenna, as I like to say to young children when I taught elementary school, Gehenna is like a spiritual dry cleaner for the soul. Nobody in life is perfect. And Gehenna is a chance for the soul to be cleansed and purified. The Jewish tradition is no one stays in Gehenna for more than a year, which is why while the mourning period for a parent is 12 months, our custom is not to say Kaddish for 12 months. The idea is that if I, for example, were to say Kaddish for 12 months for my mother, people would think, oh, Ina Travis must have been a terrible person. She's going to be in Gehenna for 12 months. That's why her son is saying Kaddish. So there are different customs, but the prevalent custom among Ashkenazi Jews of European descent is that we stop once the final month of mourning begins. So for example, the last day I can say Kaddish for my mother is June 6th, even though I will continue to be a mourner for another month or so. Okay, so we see from the story that there is this notion of Gehenna. So I just want to share that with you. A second source I want to share with you, because Chabad seems to be everywhere and they do wonderful work, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe was a great, great man. He had a little short piece on this Judaism believe in heaven and hell, and I wanted to share that with you. The Lubavitcher Rebbe is quoted as follows. Even the honest atheist will agree that a first cause, an original being, must have preceded the universe. This original cause or source is what so humbled Einstein, although he incorrectly described it as a religious experience. The questions of faith begin with how we understand this first cause, its nature, and its relationship to us and to the universe. Judaism does have a concept of reward and punishment in the afterlife. However, since the words we use to bring to mind certain images, particularly heaven and hell, it is better to use Jewish terminology, which comes without baggage. When someone dies, the disembodied soul leaves this sensory world and enters Gan Eden, the spiritual Garden of Eden. In this Garden of Eden, the soul enjoys the rays of the divine presence, a purely spiritual enjoyment, depending on the Torah learning and the good deeds done while in the body. Every year on the yahrzeit, the day of passing, the soul ascends to another level closer to God. This gives it tremendous pleasure. I'm going to pause here in the Rebbe's writing and point out Maimonides, the great medieval scholar, and we're going to quote one of his sources in a short time. Maimonides agreed that the world to come was spiritual. The soul did bask in the rays of the divine presence. But the Rambam, Maimonides, felt that the level at which you died was the level at which your soul remained. The Rambam had no notion that the soul could continue to ascend up the spiritual ladder, so to speak. Many people disagree with that. You'll frequently hear in synagogues when a person is observing a yahrzeit for a parent or for whomever, the congregants, after he or she says the Kaddish, will say, may his neshama, may his soul, may her soul have an aliyah, may they go up a level. I'll also say there are some who envision, they talk about olam haba being more physical. There are midrashim talk about the wondrous meals people eat. I think the spiritual notion of this Gan Eden, this world to come, for me resonates more strongly. I will, again, as I diverge, I'll share with you another insight which I find very powerful. And each year when it was part of a commentary on a weekly parsha, each year when I rediscover it, I enjoy it all the same. The Slovene Rabbi, in a book called Tivot Shalom, it's a wonderful, wonderful book. He talks about a person's place in this spiritual Garden of Eden is commensurate with the joys that a person gets in this world from the fulfillment of mitzvot. It's clear, all the sources are clear. There's an idea that every Jew has a place in this spiritual Garden of Eden, but some portions are better or larger than others, depending on your good deeds, your Torah story, whatever. And but the Slovene Rebbe says that the joy with which you serve is reflected in your portion. So he says, for example, that a person who mechanically observes the Shabbat, who goes about Shabbat almost as if it's a burden, certainly gets credit and reward for observing the Shabbat, but the Slovene Rebbe says his portion in the world to come, he will be like a bench in the spiritual Garden of Eden that the people sit on. Just as this person took no joy in Shabbat in this world, he'll have no joy in the world to come. It's an interesting thought. Now let's get back to the writing of the Rebbe. In order to restore the level of purity the soul has possessed before entering the physical world, it must undergo a degree of refinement commensurate to the degree with which the body may have indulged itself. That's Gehenna. Before entering the Garden of Eden, though, a soul must be in a state of spiritual excellence, for it cannot enjoy the divine presence to the fullest degree with the pleasures and coarseness of our physical world still engraved on it. This would give the soul a poor reception of divine radiance and must be removed. If a person sinned in this lifetime, as most of us do, then, to continue the radio analogy, we have a serious interference. In order to restore the level of purity the soul had possessed before entering the physical world, it must undergo a degree of refinement commensurate to the degree which the body may have indulged itself. This means there is quite a bit of cleaning to be done. This cleaning process hurts, but it is a spiritual and mental process designed not for retribution, but to allow one to truly enjoy his or her reward in Gan Eden. This cleansing process is called Gehenna. It is not hell. It's not hell. And there's a notion, for instance, that this cleaning process it varies from person to person following degree. If a person was very lusty and passionately pursued his misdeeds, then Gehenna for this person is very, very cold. If a person were cold and uncaring to the needs of the community, to the poor and the orphan, the widow, for that person, the cleansing process in Gehenna will be very, very hot. But the important thing, as the Rabbi points out, this is not a process of retribution, but this is for cleansing so that the soul can better enjoy, as it were, being in the divine presence.